welcome to a cover story interview with Manish Tiwari, Senior National Spokesperson for the Congress Party, a former UPA minister. But more importantly, Manish, I must congratulate you on your new book. He's come out with his fourth book. It's about the 10 flashpoints on national security that impacted India in the last 2 decades, in 20 years, 10 by 20. Congratulations, Manish. I believe you had a spectacular launch, which I'm sorry I missed.
Thank you very much, Priya. You've always been very kind, and we missed you at the launch, and wish you all the best. I hope you recover from this little accident that you've had as soon as possible.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yes, fingers crossed. But before we talk about the launch and the book, I have to talk to you about the events that followed the launch. In fact, I've noticed that there was some criticism because of the 10 flashpoints. You actually, the name you mentioned, Kargil, you mentioned Operation Parakram, you mentioned, of course, 2611, the nuclear deal. But you also talk about the response to 2611, and that's got your colleagues a bit worried because you said that the response was not adequate, did not have the momentum that it should have. I'll go into more of that later, but I noticed Adhir Ranjan Chaudhary, one of your colleagues, said that he should be talking about the Chinese incursions in Arunachal. But he should have read the book. I think there's 2 chapters on it, if I'm not wrong. So
that's what I keep telling people. Don't prejudge the book. Please do read the book. This is not about UPA versus NDA. This is about India's responses to national security situations. It is frankly government agnostic. It is not about one government or the other. I have tried to look at it objectively and dispassionately without really either trying to favor or trying to be critical about a particular dispensation because of my own political proclivities.
But and for you also write, I think it's mentioned in the foreword that though you're a member of a lot of standing committees, you haven't used any sensitive document. You've just written as more of an analysis. And
I deliberately did that because I based this book entirely on the public record deliberately, for the simple reason that when you write about national security, you run a very sensitive gauntlet. And the effort was actually to flag these issues and make them a subject of public discussion, because I found that in our legislative space, there is absolutely no discussion about national security at all. So this book is actually not so much aimed at those fine men and women who actually discharge a national security remit, as it is at my own colleagues and the people in general, in order to sensitize them about the fact that we need to have more calmer, more dispassionate, and more objective discussions about it.
We don't have discussions, but we don't even have a comprehensive document in place, a strategic defense document. I think that's something that you are flagged as an issue of concern.
Well, right at the beginning of the book, Priya, and I'm thankful to you that you bring it up. One of the foremost things which I have mentioned is that India's security situation has undergone a transformation in the past 20 years. While we continue to grapple with conventional challenges, hijacking, the use of non-state actors by Pakistan, the broader transgressions by China, but in the meantime, the battlefield has undergone a complete transformation. So therefore, the whole cyber domain has been weaponized. The whole space domain has been weaponized. You have, artificial intelligence being deployed to use small drones to really carry out very kinetic attacks, like, for example, what happened with the refineries in Saudi Arabia. So therefore, you are dealing with a completely new paradigm. The PLA has been experimenting with hybrid warfare after they've reorganized themselves into theater commands. So India is completely and absolutely ill-equipped doctrinally in order to meet these challenges. And that's why I say that India needs a properly discussed national security strategy and a national security doctrine to underpin it.
Properly discussed means what? Get all all parties on board. Get the strategic experts on board.
No, it's not about a political discussion around a national security doctrine, but more importantly, there has to be an informed conversation with people who are either interested in the subject or have domain knowledge, so that we have a well-founded document which underpins our entire national security strategy over the past 20 years. For example, the draft nuclear doctrine, which was put in the public space post the nuclear tests by the then Vajpayee government, which was then formalized by their cabinet in 2003, which continues to hold the field till today. I mean, the post the nuclear test of 1998, the draft nuclear doctrine, which was put into place even before Mr. Vajpayee was sworn in as Prime Minister for another time, where we articulated the no first use policy and various other things, for example, the civilian control over our nuclear weapons, that continues to hold the field. So therefore, those are the kind of doctrines India requires as we go forth.
And you think Pakistan would have tested if we hadn't tested? I know you go a bit of that in your book also.
Well, that's the chicken and egg question. If we wouldn't have done it, would they have done it? But the fact is that the nuclearization or the de facto nuclearization of South Asia was a reality far, far before the formal nuclear test took place in 1998 and by both India and Pakistan. If you go back to Operation Brass Tacks and Pakistan's response to it, they held out the nuclear threat. Then if you go back to 1990 to the Gates mission to India and Pakistan, again, the nuclear saber was flashed by Pakistan. So therefore, the nuclearization of South Asia was a de facto reality much, much before it got formalized in 1998. And the tragedy is that if you look at other countries which have gone down the same street, this threshold of nuclearization has actually brought strategic sanity to those countries, because the entire nuclear theology is really predicated on the mutually assured destruction doctrine, that the retaliation would be so massive if a nuclear attack is launched that everybody would be exterminated. But in the case of India and Pakistan, and even in the case of India and China, because both of them have relaxed no first use postures, this nuclearization has actually not brought down tensions. It has exacerbated tensions, or the tensions have exacerbated despite this nuclearization. And that's the worry, that we are operating in a very unstable environment under a nuclear overhang.
Before we go on to China, I want to talk about the elephant in the book, the response to 2611, really, that's causing. Because, I noticed you say that our response in that time, during the UPA government, the response lacked momentum. But our response during the surgical strike, again, you said did not do the punitive damage it should have. So you're not happy with either response.
Essentially, what I tried to point out when I talk about these various incidents which have taken place is that there is a quintessential dilemma that has been confronting the Indian state going all the way back to 1980, when Pakistan operationalized the strategy of bleeding India with 1,000 cuts. And that is whether to use conventional force against non-state actors, B, how efficacious is that use of conventional force against non-state actors, and C, that if you do decide to use it, how do you calibrate it so that you are not up an escalatory ladder, which can then lead to completely unforeseen consequences. And that is the reason that from 1980 till 2013, till the time the NDA BJP government decided to take public ownership of the surgical strikes which were conducted post-Uri, that remained the template across governments. But in my estimation, after our victory in the Kargil war, we entered into a very nasty phase of the proxy war which Pakistan had unleashed Kuwait. So you had the IC-814 hijack, you had the Jammu and Kashmir Assembly attack, the attack on Indian Parliament, the attack on the military camp in Kalchuk, then you had the Mumbai train bombings across various Indian cities. So 2611 wasn't a flash in the pan. There was 8 years of unremitting violence that had preceded it. And I'm not even trying to break it up into UPA years or NDA years, because this was violence which had hit India. And 26/11, the sheer depravity of the assault, the sheer barbarousness, the manner in which, innocent people were slaughtered in cold blood, in my estimation, warranted a kinetic response. I said this for the first time on the 28th of November, 2008, from a Congress platform as a Congress spokesperson, in response to a question. And that's been my view throughout, that we should have, post 26/11, operationalized a kinetic response to Pakistan.
In fact, that's another note I wanted to bring in is, what I like about the book, Manish, is you look at of course, the flashpoints from an analyst point of view, strategic point of view, but also there is the Manish Tiwari, the spokesperson. We get to know the thinking, the rationale, what you were going through at that time. For instance, during 26/11, you had a friend who was stuck there also. So there was that concern. Plus the way the Congress formulated its response. So it gave us an insight into how Veerappa Moily, Ahmed Patel, how you guys actually work out responses or not, as the case may be.
Well, in the sense, that's not the best example of working out a response. We actually do a better job of it, or at least used to do a better job of it. But the fact is that, yes, it was an evolving situation. And in an evolving situation, nobody knew what the next moment would bring. And there was this media ecosystem 24/7. In fact, I've been very critical of the role of the media during 26/11. If you would notice, that is also a large part of the book. But the important thing is that strategic dilemma, Priya, that whatever policy that we have initiated, has it brought about a change in the behavior of Pakistan? That, unfortunately, the needle has not moved on it. In my estimation, the surgical strikes post Uri, or even the Balakot bombings, have not brought about a change in the behavior of the Pakistan deep state. And the classical example of that is that if the surgical strikes would have been as successful as they were claimed to be, then Pulwama shouldn't have happened. And the Jaish-e-Mohammed took ownership of Pulwama minutes after that unfortunate massacre of our very brave CRPF Jawans takes place. So my concern is that as a country, we have not really been able to find the adequate response. Quay Pakistan, which is not only a hard state, but is a quasi-military state for all practical purposes. And that dilemma continues even today.
Manish, regarding, whether China, Pakistan, they're all in our neighborhood. So this idea of formulating a cohesive response, who do you think has been better handling it? I know you said my book is government agnostic, but there are the UPA years, and now we have the BJP's response.
Well, Priya, one of the themes which runs through the books, one of the underlying themes is that India has been locked in its neighborhood since 1947 because of the baggage of partition, Quay Pakistan, and the unsettled borders with regard to China. Number two, India will never ever be able to achieve its full potential till the time it does not find a resolution, and a stable resolution, to both these situations. Number three, India will never be able to maximize itself till the time you don't have an integrated South Asia. Number four, that in the case of Pakistan, unfortunately, everything goes back to Bangladesh and 1971. The theme number five, and I'll end with that, is that there is a big mismatch between India's national security challenges and what it spends on its defense. So therefore, either we need to lessen the national security challenges, that is, find a modus vivendi with Pakistan and China, or we have to substantively ramp up our defense expenditures, which will obviously come at a certain cost because it'll take away from other programs. So these are the dilemmas, these are the choices which confront us. And there has to be an informed and a dispassionate discussion about it. We cannot really run away from this. Unfortunately, Parliament has not discussed the situation with regard to China which has been going on for 18 months now. And this is not healthy. In a democracy, stonewalling a debate or trying to sweep contentious issues under the carpet is not the best way of dealing with it.
But is it because you guys have not also pushed them hard enough on China? Because we've been hearing you talk outside Parliament, but there is this view that within Parliament also you need to raise issues more.
Well, let me give you two examples. First of all, every question that I have asked about the Chinese situation from September 2020 onwards, each question has been refused in the name of national security. And this is not only treatment which is meted out to me, it's apparently been meted out to Dr. Subramanian Swamy also, who's a BJP MP, or, well, who's at least affiliated to the BJP in that sense of the word. Number two, in Parliament, I think we exercised restraint because we decided that, we would give government a chance to have a discussion at an appropriate point in time. But the government seems to have taken that to be as a license not to discuss the situation with Kuwait, China. And that has not been our parliamentary tradition. In 1962, the Bharatiya Janata Sangh had only 4 MPs. One of them was Atal Bihari Vajpayee. He requested Pandit Nehru, who was then Prime Minister, that the situation with regard to China should be discussed. While the war was going on the border, between the 7th and the 15th of November 1962, both houses of parliament had a threadbare discussion about what was going on on the border. So you had a discussion in parliament, and simultaneously we were fighting China. I mean, during the entire Second World War, the British Parliament functioned efficaciously, and everything was discussed and dissected threadbare. To say that because of national security, we will not discuss certain issues, to my mind, that is a symbol of paranoia. It is a sign of insecurity. It is not a sign of strength.
Most of the instances happened. You also have got another common trend is intelligence failure. From Kargil to China to even 26/11. So that is the first thing that needs to be beefed up, right?
I agree with you entirely in the sense that, post Kargil or post the Lahore bus ride, a fantastic initiative which Prime Minister Vajpayee took. Unfortunately, he got Kargil in return. And the Pakistanis came in across a broad frontage, 160-kilometer frontage, almost 9 kilometers deep. And we were not able to detect such a large intrusion. 21 years later, the same thing happens in the case of China. They transgress at multiple points. There is absolutely no detection and much less accountability. And incidentally, the Kargil Review Committee, which was headed by the current foreign minister's very illustrious father, one of India's foremost strategic thinkers, Dr. Subramanian, he was very scathing in his indictment about this intelligence failure. And I've quoted that particular excerpt from the Kargil Review Committee report in my book. And you're right, that is what needs to be fixed in addition to a large number of other things.
In terms of China, how do we react now? In terms of the geopolitical situation where China is concerned, we have Biden, we have the whole Afghanistan crisis also, which you've touched upon. So where does India stand vis-a-vis this whole China-Pakistan teaming up?
Well, in my estimation, the disengagement agreement was a step in the right direction. We should persevere with it. Let us understand that in order to surmount our internal developmental challenges, India needs peace on its periphery for 30 long years. Similar to what Deng Xiaoping had ordained for China way back in 1979. And therefore, we need to find a stable modus vivendi with both China and Pakistan. And let's not forget the fact that unlike certain other nations with whom we want to get into military alliances or strategic partnerships, we don't have the luxury of being separated from China by 2 oceans. We live cheek to jowl with China. And so therefore, our imperatives and our situation is of a completely different order altogether. And that is why I think we need to be very careful about the kind of partnerships and the choices that we are making. And in any case, if you look at the Quad after the Anglo-Saxon alliance, the AUKUS, the Five Eyes alliance being formalized, I don't think that leaves the Quad anywhere in strategic terms. So therefore, frankly, you do not have, as of today, a coherent policy with regard to China.
In terms of our neighbors, whom should India, try and ally with? We even antagonized someone like Nepal, that was, more like a younger brother, and now they've also gone over to the other side.
Well,
Lanka?
what is more worrying at this point in time is that the Chinese have initiated very active conversations with the Bhutanese in order to resolve the land boundary issues between those two countries. Now, on the face of it, if it gets resolved, it's very good for Bhutan and very good for China. But that would mean that China would have resolved all its outstanding land boundary issues with each of its land neighbors, with the exception of India. And that's one thing which India should very seriously think about, that if the Chinese were able to resolve differences even with the Soviet Union at the height of the Sino-Soviet split, and with many other countries at almost a pittance of what their original claims were, why is this situation or this standoff with regard to India continuing to persist? I think we need to very seriously apply ourselves to it rather than have a jingoistic conversation on it. There is a need to have a realistic conversation and also figure out as to how or what our national priorities are over the next 30 years. And I'm not only talking about strategic priorities, but what our national objectives are. And then try and tailor our external environment in order to suit those needs.
Just one quick question on the book itself. Why did you choose only the last 2 decades? What was the thinking behind? I know why you wrote this book, but just in terms of formatting it, the structure, a little bit of that, if you can.
Well, thank you very much for asking that question. I was actually not planning to write this book. I was writing another book I was actually writing another book, a new security doctrine for India. And when I wrote the first 2 chapters of it, I realized that it didn't have context. And so without context, that book would have been completely and absolutely sterile. So then I decided that as a precursor to that, let me write the context of what India's security environment was over the past 20 years. So I could write that book in future. So that is how really this book came about, by accident. It was not really by design. So I guess that's how your thought process evolves once you start putting pen to paper.
This is the prologue to the next book, is that?
Well, in senses it is, because parts of that other book have already been written. So therefore, as and when I'm able to find a little more time, I would like to flesh that out, because I think India requires a new security doctrine which will hold it in good stead over the next 30 years. What should be the building blocks of that national security doctrine? I'll try and delineate that in my next book.
Something we're going to wait and watch out for. But another question is your interest in national security. Is it to do with the fact that you're from Punjab? I mean, I know you've been very interested in global affairs, but just.
Well, I think the simple answer to that is that I read too many Commando comics as a child. So therefore, maybe that is what triggered off the interest. But yes, of course, my personal brush with terror, the part of the country where I grew up, what that part was experiencing in the 80s and 90s, I think has also shaped my views with regard to national security imperatives. And that is why I personally have a very hard view on terror and how terror needs to be neutered. And it is not a very popular view at times within certain establishments, but that is my view, and I have no hesitation in expressing it.
In fact, you write also in your book that your first response to 26/11 was actually, the flashback to what actually happened in your own home.
That's true. I mean, in the sense, whenever I see a terror attack unfolding, I mean, I am absolutely personally anguished and, extremely pained and angry at what we have to really undergo, at the hands of these non-state actors, which have been deployed by Pakistan now going back 30 years, and our inability as a country to be able to really fashion a coherent or a cogent response which can neuter them permanently once for all. I think that's the conversation that we need to have, that how do we neuter this entire universe or this entire specter of terror so that our people do not live under that overhang with that insecurity, and we are able to get on with the business of making India a prosperous nation where everybody lives with dignity and with self-respect.
Thank you, Manish, for this conversation and for this book. And I hope it's taken in the spirit in which it is written, because it is indeed a very a book that I think which is a must read for everybody. Thank you, Manish, for this.
Thank you, Priya. Thank you for that compliment. I'm really honored that you had me on your show. Thank you very much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.